Greetings, Doom fans, and welcome to another edition of the Frostbite Falls Daily Rant, here on the Doomstead Diner. In last week's edition of the Daily Rant, I covered the latest in insane plans by the powers that be to resolve ongoing economic collapse through such novel inventions as negative interest rates and eliminating cash from the monetary system in favor of an all-electronic digibit currency. Before I further rant on this topic, I want no complaints that my daily rants come out weekly, not daily. They may be weekly for you, but they are daily for me because to put together one of these shows, I gotta script it, record it, audio edit it, select pics for a slideshow, and then combine the whole business together in a jambalaya of doom to drop on Diner YouTube. The only time these rants were even close to daily on a publication level was back in the Jurassic period, when I was sparring with Jimbo Quinn on the Burning platform, with all text and some Googled pics to spruce up the layout. And even then, they only came out every other day or so. The Frostbite Falls weekly rant just doesn't have the same ring to it. And besides, I keep the name for nostalgia purposes. Okay, disclaimer done. Let's get further into the meat of this topic, the wet dream of banksters, a cashless society. I covered numerous of the problems with this idea in Part 1. And here in Part 2, we're going to see if there is anything Joe Sixpack can do to combat this problem. Before we do that, though, there are a few issues I did not cover. So I want to clean up on this to be thorough. Besides the major problem of what the fuck you do when the lights go out and or the 4G network goes out on your cell phone are all those little transactions done each day. Like for instance, your kid buying a Hershey bar at the convenience store on the bike ride to school. Is every kid going to have her own plastic and cell phone to do these transactions also? Are you going to use plastic to buy some breath mints or condoms on the way to the local cat house? Are you going to pay the hooker with plastic so your wife can see the charge on the bill? That's an even bigger problem for the banksters and politicians who are promoting this idea than the average Joe Sixpack too. What would Jerry Maguire, Tom Cruise, do when Rod Tidwell, Cuba Gooding Jr., ask him to show me the money? Is Rod really going to believe Jerry has the money when he holds his smartphone up to him with a 1 and lots of zeros behind it on the new Super OLED touchscreen? For all these reasons and more, complete removal of cash from the economy seems unlikely. But the more likely scenario is to try to make all transactions over a certain threshold limit illegal to do in cash. They're already trying this stunt in Krautland, putting a €5,000 cap on cash transactions and making the max size cash note €500. The largest size denomination of fascist states of America, Federal Reserve notes, is already only $100, which is why drug dealers need suitcases full of the toilet paper to do a deal just for a few lousy kilos of coke. The fact they do such transactions quite regularly demonstrates that just providing small bills doesn't do a whole lot to stop illegal trade in anything. For the average Joe Sixpack, these days your local bank makes it quite difficult to withdraw cash over around $1,000 or so on a given day, and debit cards usually have a limit on them of around $500 a day here in normal circumstances. Over in Greece, when Syriza was in the midst of its abortive attempt to bluff the Troika into cutting them some slack, I believe they dropped the daily limit there to around €60, which isn't even enough to pay most people's rent, much less also buy food. So, even without the complete elimination of cash, the average Joe Sixpack is generally at the mercy of the banksters, unless you are very assiduous about it, withdrawing only a few $100s in cash at a time each week, and then storing this cash in the Bank of Sealy. Forget trying to withdraw $10,000 in a banking crisis. Even in the good times, they're going to make you wait minimum 3 days for this, and also try to convince you to take a cashier's check instead, please. As you can see, your money is not really your money. and it never was. Your money is really the property of the banksters who printed it, and they just rent it to you, and they can raise the rent on it anytime they like. If they make some bad bets in the casino and need to cover them so they don't get kneecapped by Guido, or so the KGB doesn't show up at their penthouse to help them off the balcony for a flying bankster lesson. So, you can't really safely keep your savings in the bank, which leads a lot of gold bugs to drop their savings into American Eagles, Hoser Maple Leafs, and South African Krugerrands as their store of wealth, backed up by some junk silver coins for small transactions. Problem with this methodology, of course, is that if they are going to make cash transactions illegal, they're also going to make transactions done with precious metals illegal. That's just substituting one form of cash for another. You're not going to be able to go into Walmart with a Krugerrand and buy a basket of groceries with it. You're also not going to be able to go over to the coin dealer to exchange it for cash because there is no cash, or at least not much besides some chump change. In fact, also these days, coin dealers are required, like all financial institutions, including banks and casinos, one and the same thing, really, to report all transactions over $10,000. This number could be easily lowered, of course, at the drop of a hat. From Goldseek on the continuing demonization of cash, financial institutions, which includes coin dealers, jewelers, and casinos, are required to report cash transactions above $10,000, as well as any activity the government might deem suspicious. Cash becomes such a hassle that it is almost radioactive, and many businesses would rather not deal with the burden. Using cash to buy a house is becoming impossible, and it is probably only a matter of time before purchasing a car with cash will become incredibly difficult also. So, it seems like you are running out of options to save outside the bankstering system and still stay inside the law of the day, as handed down on stone tablets from Lloyd Blankfein, Jamie Dimon, and Nathan Rothschild. This is pretty hard to circumvent with large quantities of money. But if you are a typical Joe Sixpack, who these days has no more than 2 or 3 months worth of savings in the bank to tide him over a crisis, like his car needs a new tranny or his son broke his arm skateboarding, there are ways to put away savings that cannot be touched. Let's say your monthly budget is $2,000, $1,000 for rent, $200 for food, $800 for everything else. You actually take home, after taxes though, around $2,200. So you could be saving $200 a month every month if you are in surplus. If you put this $200 in the bank and it is getting negative 1% interest, at the end of the year, you're going to have $198. Not compounded, of course. That's not a huge loss, but it's still a loss, of course. If, instead of putting it in the bank, though, you take that $200 and buy $200 worth of long-lasting foods, by the end of the year, you have $2,400 in food saving. This will actually accrue in value, since by the end of the year, the bag of rice you bought for $20 in January will likely go up in price and cost $25 or more. So now, in any given month an emergency occurs, you have $200 extra to spend on that emergency because instead of buying food that month, you eat your store food. Together with your normal $200 savings, you now have $400 to put towards an emergency, like buying a new tire for your car after a blowout, etc., without having to start running up your credit card. What do you do if that emergency bill is greater than $400? Say it's a toothache and the dentista wants $1,200 to relieve your pain and fix the tooth. In this case, you pay the marathon man $400 upfront and eat your saved food with your now pain-free tooth for 3 months while you pay him off. Most dentistas, no matter how sadistic they are, will give you payment plans for their services. Just ask Eddie. Another option, assuming there is still at least some cash floating around for small transactions, would be to sell a month's worth of your saved food to a friend or relative. So now, instead of $400 for that month extra, you now have $600. In a real pinch, you could use a credit card to pay the immediate bill, then eat your saved food for 6 months until you get the bill paid off. Obviously, this has limitations, since generally speaking, you can only save upwards of 2 years' worth of food. So in this example, that is a maximum of $4,800 in savings, which is not a lot, but is way more than 50% of the current population has in the bank. You can add to this with other types of savings, gasoline for your car, for instance. If you have a couple of 55-gallon drums, that is $110 in savings at $2 a gallon, since the price of gas seems to be going through the basement now. Now, when the emergency comes, you don't buy gas that month, and you use your saved gas to run the SUV so you can still make it to work. For saving larger amounts of money, you are in something of a pickle, though. Since, as mentioned, the precious metals paradigm doesn't work too well if the government either makes transactions in PMs illegal and or records those transactions and drops a 10% tax on them. Then you are better off taking the 1% hit in the bank account from the negative interest rate. Land doesn't make too much sense other than the land you actually live on, since you'll have property taxes to pay each year that are also probably higher than the 1% negative interest rate on your savings account. The bottom line on all of this is that the ability to save large amounts of money is in the process of disappearing, and that only makes sense, really, since the resources that the money buys are also disappearing. Like the hunter-gatherers of old, we are going to have to become accustomed to maybe having enough savings of the basics to carry through a lean year or two at best, and to living mostly a pay-as-you-go lifestyle. For the impoverished population of the world, which makes up the vast majority of Homo saps, this is not a big adjustment to make. They already live this way. It will be a much bigger adjustment for the upper middle class, wealthy, and filthy rich people with large sums of money currently in the bank, soon to be either taxed out from under them or used to bail in suffering banksters. And that's all the doom. This time until next time, here on the Doomstead Diner. Later, diners.